Hello, I'm Laura Furiosi, divorced mother of 3, and I'm here with my mother, Lynette Galvin, with 35 years' experience in family law. You're listening to the Divorce Course podcast. Through our candid discussions, we hope to help you through your divorce or de facto separation. We will be answering the most commonly asked questions and covering the stages and steps that you will face on your way to freedom. Mortgages. Just the sound of the name of the word is terrifying. It doesn't make sense. And when it really doesn't make sense is during divorce. So today we're going to address some of those commonly asked questions about mortgages just at the beginning of separation, during property settlement, and how a court deals with it. Hello, Mum.
Hello, Laura. Hi, everyone.
Welcome to this very lovely, exciting episode about mortgages that I hope are going to alleviate some people's brains and stress. Mm-hmm. But we want to just really stress and emphasize to everybody here, go and get your own legal advice. This is general education only. So, Mum.
So, Laura.
Mortgages. Would you say this is like the thing that you deal with the most? Other than children's things? Is mortgages like the big thing?
I think it's like after children, it's pretty well the first thing a person asks about when they go to see a lawyer, because that's one of the things, I think, isn't it, in the front of their minds as they're about to leave. I can't leave. We've got a mortgage. It's a commitment, isn't it, to the bank or to each other, I guess.
Yeah. And it's important to note before we get into the questions like, you know, who pays the mortgage? If you're living in the house, do you have to pay? If you move out, do you have to pay? And, you know, how do you split a mortgage? How does a court deal with the mortgage? What happens if the mortgage is in the joint names? You know, can you get money back from paying the mortgage? We ask all these questions, but a reminder that if you are going through domestic violence or a family violence situation, of course, call 1-800-RESPECT. You can call Community Legal or Women's Legal Services or a community legal service in your area. But you can ask the bank, can't you, Mum, to just put a hold on it for a moment. You can catch.
Yeah, a lot of people can do that. People do that. They might ask for they call it a moratorium, which just means a hold. It stops. It's just
not a horrible name.
I never thought of that, Laura. But
let alone say it. But okay, so what are you saying? People can go to the bank.
Yeah.
And say, hey,
this has happened. We're separated. I'm going to struggle with paying the mortgage. Could you put it to interest only? Now, not everyone should do that. You need to talk to your lawyer, or think about it first. Generally, the big banks at least have policies for family violence and how to deal with customers who are experiencing family violence. So if that's you, look up your bank online and see what their policies are for family violence. If there's no family violence, you still could, if you've got a good reason to not pay the whole mortgage. Generally, it might be that we're going to sell the house. Can you just hold off and pay interest only for the next few months till we do so? I don't think, or you might be able to do it under hardship, but if you're going to be taking over the mortgage in terms of paying it out and putting it in your sole name, it'll be terrible for you to say to the bank, I can't afford the mortgage at the existence. So be very thoughtful. Talk to someone in finances and work all that out.
Of course, this isn't financial advice. No. I'm just saying I'm very aware that one of the things that a lot of people do when helping someone in a domestic violence, family violence situation is if the mortgage is on their shoulders and that's the one thing they're freaking out about the most when they should be focusing on their safety, go to the bank, explain your situation. But go and look online. They all do have family violence policies, pretty much all the big ones. Yep. And remembering we're talking about Australia here. So let's get into then that aside, because some people might be listening that don't have that issue. But that aside, Mum, one of the biggest questions we get asked, well, actually, I take that back. There's so many questions we get asked, but one of the ones that sticks out as a frequently asked is, do I have to keep paying the mortgage, or who pays the mortgage? So let's do some different scenarios. Okay. So imagine the person who's listening today has stayed in the house with the kids because it's better for the kids to continue for the moment while they're sorting out property. They're in the house with the kids. Their partner has moved, their ex has moved out, living at mum's. Who pays the mortgage?
Well, there's two ways of looking at it. One is the bank's point of view. From the bank's point of view, without you telling them anything, the bank doesn't care who pays it as long as somebody pays it. Now, In terms of post-separation, the person who's living in the house is generally expected to be paying the mortgage and all of the expenses of living in the house. When we get to court...
Is that a family court thing?
Yes.
What
they say is that's not a contribution that the other person should be matching. Yes, you're paying the mortgage, but the other person is presumably having their own issues and finding somewhere other than mum's perhaps to stay. And so a lot of people say, I paid the mortgage for a year, but then if they were living in the house, the court says, no, that's not a contribution.
We're talking about right at the start. We'll forget about contributions for a moment. We're just talking about the interim baby steps. So you're saying, what happens if the person who moves out is the breadwinner? They make all the money. The person at home with the kids is the homemaker, doesn't make any money, just looks after the kids. Can they ask their ex to continue paying the mortgage until property?
To right, they can. Yeah. Because if they don't have an income of their own or it's not enough, of course they can. If the ex-partner is not prepared to do so, then you might have to look at spousal maintenance or something to come to you so you can afford the mortgage.
Then let's reverse it the other way around. Let's say you've moved out of the house. And your ex is staying in the house. Your ex doesn't want to move. Your ex is doing absolutely nothing. And you're still paying half the mortgage and you're paying your rent. Can you stop paying the mortgage?
Well, again, the bank won't be very impressed if you stop paying the mortgage. You'll get a bad credit rating and so forth. Both of you would get a bad credit rating, to be honest. But you've got your own expenses to be paid. And at the end of the day, the court will look at that. The fact that someone stayed in the house rent-free or only paying half the mortgage, I think that has to feed over into contributions, Laura. If you stop paying the mortgage and your ex doesn't care about their credit rating and they won't pay the mortgage, you may have to get them out of the house. And either you go back in if you can afford the mortgage, or you might have to, and this is the ultimate thing, you might have to get a tenant in there until property settlement because you guys can't afford the mortgage.
So aside from the hard and fast rule of your name is on the mortgage, if your name is on the mortgage, and you have to keep help paying, otherwise you're going to end up with a bad credit rating. But what you're saying is in the family court in Australia, they look at it as if you move out, you've got to worry about your own stuff. So you don't have to keep paying the mortgage. So, because I do hear of people's situations where their ex is in the house and they're comfortably living there and the other person's living somewhere else paying rent and mortgage and bills and utilities for the other place as well as their own. And then you hear the other stories where people are in the house and they can't afford to pay for anything. So for those people, spousal maintenance and get your property settlement sorted as soon as possible.
Yes.
But for the people that are paying everything and living somewhere else, you're saying
it's unsustainable. I think if the person in the house can't afford to pay for the mortgage and you can't afford to pay for the mortgage if you're out of the house, then it clearly has to either be sold ASAP or you're going to have to get a tenant in for the short term.
Right.
I mean, people can stay in this limbo land where they're still tied together with the mortgage for ages because everything's so finely balanced. And they don't want to lose their credit rating. And, you've got someone sitting in the house who won't leave. And you're really going to have to look at getting to court, do some mediation, but get it to court, and the court will soon sort that out.
Okay, so let's talk about that next part because this is the other thing people worry about, and you've already touched on it a little bit. It's this contributions, so some people have said to me, in our webinars and questions, they were like, well, this has happened. I've been living at my mum's house, or I've been living in a rental. I've been paying the mortgage. I've been paying all the bills and fees and etc. Is that going to be given back to me in property settlement? How does that work? So what happens with mortgage and property settlement?
Okay. Oh, that's a big question, Laura. Okay, so every case is different, right? Every case turns on its facts. But what has happened in the past is the court will take notice that you've paid the mortgage, but you weren't living in the house, and that the other person presumably had rent-free or mortgage-free in the house. And that might result in a percentage increase for you in terms of contributions.
Right.
So
what about if you're living in the house and you're paying the mortgage yourself? Does that count as contributions?
No, it doesn't. The court said, yeah.
So if you move out and pay, then it does. But if you live in and pay, it doesn't.
Yeah, because think of it this way. If you're living in the place and paying the mortgage, presumably if you had to move out, you'd be paying rent or something somewhere else. So if you're sitting in there and you've got the house, you should cover the mortgage. Otherwise, get a tenant in.
Okay. And I love this tenant idea. And remembering everyone, we're not financial advisors. And this is Australian. And Mum's talking about what generally happens in court. So just be aware of that. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But you have mentioned this a few times where you're saying if you're struggling to pay it, if you've got a spare room and you know someone that's safe, if you've got kids or you've got someone, you could rent it out, couldn't you? And have them.
Yeah, people do. People do. I'm just thinking when you get to court say you go to court and there's trouble with the mortgage, you're able to attach a letter from the bank saying we're foreclosing, whatever. The court orders that can be made are for the other person to be in the house, for the house to be rented out, or for the house to be sold. So the court has to take it as they find it. And if you're in the house and paying the mortgage, you're getting something for your money. Okay. And if you're out of the house and paying the mortgage, you're not getting anything for your money. Because let's face it, the payments that you make on a mortgage are predominantly interest when, these big mortgages. So it's not going to reduce the debt on the house very much, by and large.
Does ouster orders come into this? Is this because ouster at least makes sense as opposed to a moratorium? The ouster orders, are they sometimes used in this incident?
I love that you find moratorium a weird word, but ouster's all right. So
you're on your out to get out.
So ouster orders, yes, they're where one person lives in the house, perhaps what we would call a former matrimonial home, and the other person has to leave. Yes, that's a case. The court can do those sole occupancy cases. One of the factors they look at is whether a person who's staying there can afford to pay the mortgage. So that comes into play. Or whether the person has somewhere else they can move to conveniently. So, sole occupancy is what they call it in the family court. Ouster orders are more what they use in the local courts in terms of family violence and so forth. But yes, it can come in, and it's pretty tricky for you. If you want to keep the house and you don't have enough money, but you've got the children and everything, then your application might have to be your ex-partner to leave the house and pay you some spousal maintenance so that you can afford the mortgage. Yeah, because you can get trapped. You can feel very trapped because you worry if they just miss a payment, you're really, you're going to be getting a letter from the bank.
I think there's countless people out there trapped just in this divorce limbo, paying mortgages and just continuing their old life and, paying half the electricity bill, paying half the sewage or whatever it is, the water rates, etc., on top of their new life that they've got to try and create whilst trying to figure it out. And I think sometimes it's important to highlight some people think it's easier to do it slowly for some reasons. But in other ways, talking about this kind of stuff, it's harder financially to do it slowly for the breadwinner and for the person who might not be the breadwinner. It's hard for both.
And also too, a lot of people take on extra shifts or extra hours at work or a second job to pay all of these expenses. And, when you're really busy every day and you're probably getting kids out the door and working extra hours, there's no incentive really to sit down and go, we're going to have this hard conversation. We're going to have to, I haven't got any energy. I've just got enough energy to get home, go, eat, go to bed. And you just put this on the back burner.
And look, I can see why people put this on the back burner because if you can't see how it happens, I think that puts a blockage, because so that's what I'd like to talk about now. How does the court deal with mortgages? So how can you via, like, without going to court, so you could do it in mediation or just agreeing, or in court, if there's a mortgage with joint names, how is it dealt with in the court? What does the court do to unjoin?
You mean this is at the final hearing or at mediation?
Well, anywhere along.
Yeah.
How do you untangle yourself from a mortgage?
Yeah. And isn't that the thing? I remember that was the thing I thought of the most. It was really a struggle. Okay, guys. So here's what the court does. It says, first of all, is there someone who can afford the mortgage? And we'll make an order that they pay the full mortgage. Okay. If neither of you can pay the full mortgage, then the court will look at, from a spousal maintenance component, whether there is a capacity of the other person to contribute to the mortgage and whether you have that need. And then they may make an order for spousal maintenance along the way that will give you enough money to pay the balance that you can't afford if you're in the house, or that you might have to pay spousal maintenance so that they can stay in the house. If nobody can afford the house, the court will order it to be sold, and the proceeds generally then end up in a trust account if you haven't worked out what your division of it is, and the mortgage gets paid out as part of that sale. Then there is this option when it comes to your final hearing and we're untangling everything. And let's say you want to stay in the house, right? And you can afford the mortgage. You go to the bank, see if you can get a loan to the same as the mortgage that's in joint name, so you can have a mortgage in your own name only. But remember, you'll have to borrow a bit extra usually to find cash to pay out the other person, unless there's other assets that'll balance. So
when you say pay out the other person, you're talking about in property settlement. You've got to be able to give them their share of whatever was in the kitty for the mortgage.
Yeah. And of course, because we add up all of the property from everywhere, there's the equity in the house because you take off the liabilities for it. And then there's cars and super and so forth. So if you can afford to cover the mortgage, get one in your own name, and if you have to pay the other person, when you add everything up and work out your percentages and contributions, work out how much they're supposed to get, and that if you can borrow that much as well, then you can probably keep the house in a property settlement. Same if they're sitting in it, this person who's sitting there and not paying the full mortgage, the sooner you get to mediation and get them to court, the better, because the court will find that as unsustainable. No one wants the house. It gets sold. Yeah.
Right. So really the problem comes, the hard bit is, so you don't really have a problem with the mortgage if everybody just wants to get rid of the house. You just sell it and split it and walk away. The problem happens if you do want the house. Yep. You got to get the mortgage in your name.
Yeah.
So it would be great, Mum, if you could do us a flow chart.
Oh, yeah.
Where you could say, is someone able to afford the mortgage? Yes.
Oh.
Then is someone able to afford the mortgage? No. Is someone able to afford the mortgage for the other person? Yes. So would it be great if you could do a flow chart for us?
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So we'll try and work on that. You can check on www.thedivorcecourse.com.au/blog and go to this episode. It's called Mortgages something. We actually haven't come up with a name yet. But check it out, look up for the mortgages episode, and we'll try and put the flow chart in there eventually. The next question then comes to, most of these people aren't in court.
No,
right?
That's true.
And most of these people are in this horrible limbo of not knowing what to do. So what are your best tips for anybody struggling, knowing that this is education only and you should 100% go and see a lawyer?
And a financial advisor.
And a financial advisor. And we've got, I really, really want to keep the house as an episode, outside of the box ideas as well, which is another episode. So if you are listening, you do want to keep the house, go and listen to those episodes. if you need spousal maintenance, go and listen to that episode. I'll put those links in the show notes. Go to thedivorcecourse.com.au/blog and find this episode to find it.
And child support also can be another source of income. So you're really going to have to work out your financial plan, look at your dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What are your best tips?
One is don't let this situation drag on too long. At the moment, as we record, there's a lot of places the value of the property is going up and up and up. And if it is going up in your area, then the difference between the mortgage and the value gets greater and greater. And that means you've got to borrow all that much more to buy the other person out of the property. You know, that's...
I never thought of it as a bad thing.
Yes.
So property prices going up is a good thing if you've got a house.
Okay. If you can only borrow, let's say a house is worth, say, $400,000 and it goes up to $700,000 between, you getting separated and you sorting things out, and the mortgage is $350,000, say. So you would only have to get a $350,000 mortgage plus whatever money you needed to pay him out of his half of that $50,000, $350,000 from $400,000. So that's $25,000. So you'd have a mortgage of $375,000, right? But if it's gone up to $700,000, then you've got to borrow your $350,000, and then they're entitled to another $175,000, perhaps, if it's a 50-50, and if there's no other assets. And that means your mortgage is going to be, $525,000 or something.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
I see.
So
there's a problem. Having to buy out your ex out of the mortgage is an issue. Now, I'm just going to put this question here because I know the answer and I hope our listeners know the answer, but I'm just going to put it here, Mum.
Okay.
If your name is not on the house and if your name is not on the mortgage, does that mean you are not entitled to the property? If you're separated or about to be and you need to get everything finalised and sorted but you don't know what to do next, or you're looking for a way to do your own divorce and settlement without spending thousands of dollars on lawyer, then you already know what you need to do, and that is to sign up and become a member of the DIY Divorce Blueprint. Empower, educate and equip yourself with the legal know-how and the tools you need to get divorced or de facto separated and finally settle. Work through this course at your own pace without feeling confused, lost, scared or overwhelmed of all the family law legal jargon and processes. Let us walk with you through this journey and show you a better way. Now, I'm just going to put this question here because I know the answer and I hope our listeners know the answer, but I'm just going to put it here, Mum. If your name is not on the house and if your name is not on the mortgage, does that mean you are not entitled to the property in property settlement?
Not at all. The court, the job that the family court in Australia can do is they can reallocate the property and transfer it between people. And they know that it's common enough that someone has their name on the house and the mortgage and the other person doesn't. That happens for all sorts of reasons. Might be for tax or might be for liabilities, so that doesn't matter at all to the courts.
What about, and if you haven't listened to our episode on important dates and timings, please go listen to that. What if someone has left this drag on for so long, they've either got divorced and the year is up,
Whoa.
or they've been de facto separated for 2 years and they're still sitting in this mess of the house hasn't sold, it's still in both names and there's this mortgage. What happens? What happens to those people?
Okay, so the rules about filing for a property settlement out of time, that's what they call it when those deadlines have passed, quite complex and really depend in each case. So if you're more than 2 years separated as a de facto and you're still sitting in this mess, go and get some advice, legal advice, and maybe bring an application urgently to the court so that you can sort of ask the court to please, will you hear our case? Because we're stuck and we can't get it sorted. If you're married and the year's up, same thing. Because if you don't, and the family court says, no, you're out of time, we're not going to do anything, well, we're not dealing with it, you've left it too long and you haven't got a good enough excuse. Well, then you're left to the Supreme Courts in your state, the county courts, whatever the property law rules are or law is in your state, as if it was you and some bloke down the road or some woman up the street that you both went in and bought a house together as a business partner And if you're both on the mortgage and you're both on the property, then you sell it if that's agreed and you each get 50-50. If you're not on the mortgage and not in the ownership, then you don't get anything if the court won't hear your case. There's everything they call it everything falls where it lays where it falls. Okay, so whose name it?
So that's leading us into the next part of our discussion about this, Mum, and this is the 4 personality types. Mm-hmm. And we've seen some sneaky tricks with the manipulative and controlling types.
Yep.
Who sometimes seem to be avoidant.
Yes.
But it could just be that they want this, maybe the mortgage is in their name, maybe the house is in their name, and they just want the time limit up. They've seen a lawyer, they want the time limit up. And then if it is up and if you can't get the court to see you, then they walk away with it all. Is that right?
Unless you can sue your lawyer for not telling you about the deadline. So you need to know your deadline date. You need to get it documented. And if you have a dispute about when the separation took place in a de facto relationship, work on the earliest date you can and just get it into the court. So it's not a question you have to ask. And I have seen people who negotiate right up to the end and then a smart letter comes and goes, you're out of time. Well, yeah. So you guys.
All right. So everybody get your calendar.
Yeah.
Get the date that your ex and you say was the separation date. And if it's a different date, put them both in and count the days and make sure you know when your deadline is.
Yes.
Because you don't have to settle, but you've had at least to have filed for
That's right.
in court.
That's exactly right. And that
doesn't mean mediation, does it? That means court.
Yes.
Court. So you have to have a court number for property.
And you've got to get your foot in the door of the court, so to speak. Pardon me. Foot in the door of the court. So do those documents. If you haven't got time to do all of the documents, and again, this is general education, what I would do would be to file something urgently just to get it in there, even if you haven't got time to do all the other steps, if you haven't got time for mediation. Do you know, some people think that mediation is compulsory and that you can't, compulsory in everything, and that you can't just agree on stuff before mediation. We've been so strong on emphasizing mediation in the courts have, that people have forgotten there's an old-fashioned way of sorting things out as well, whereas you just agree with each other.
Yeah.
Or there's a couple of letters and then you can agree. And if you're urgent, you don't have to go to mediation. If it's really urgent or you're not safe, you don't have to go to mediation.
So can you get an agreement about the mortgage in a consent order?
Yep, you can. And Section 90 of the Family Law Act says that there is no stamp duty payable on any state government document, and each state runs their own titles office, their own land office. None of those states can charge for a transfer that's made between people and on a house if it's pursuant to a court order, and a consent order is another form of a court order. Also, if it's pursuant to a financial agreement. And the word pursuant means that you can't transfer the house first and refinance first and then do your court documents. You have to do it after your court document is agreed. And I have to say to people, sometimes it just seems all so many stages and so many steps. But you don't, and a lot of people do it linearly. Oh, I can't do the property settlement until we sell the house, and I can't do this until we've sold the boat. But actually you can. And if you're amicable in those early stages of separation, a good lawyer will be able to draft documents for you, setting out how each item will be dealt with. We're going to sell the house, we're going to put in, and they put in the price that you're going to list it for, and how many agents, and how you're going to choose the agent.
Consent orders that basically step out what you are going to do. Yep. You don't have to do it and then go, we've got this much money and we're going to divide it in half. And so consent orders is not necessarily about who gets what money. It's also about what steps and stages you're going to take to get the property sorted.
Yep. It's that your orders will be like a roadmap of what's going to happen. And there'll be formulas in there, how to calculate percentages for, so once you know the answer you want, someone can draft the orders to match it for you. Because you can imagine, since the Family Law Act started in 1976, there have been hundreds and thousands of people who didn't have their house sold but went to court for an order that the house be sold. And then it's quite normal to have orders about, first you do this you're going to pay the advertising fees, you're going to pay the mortgage rates, anything outstanding, and then the balance be divided between you both, and a percentage is put in there.
For anyone going through this process, we've got an episode called Selling the House, and we talk about the selling the house process. And look, it does seem quite overwhelming, the whole mortgage situation. But what you're saying, Mum, is it isn't, but it can be if you let it go too long.
Yeah. It's a hard thing. And you're cutting a cake, you're cutting a pie, and you're not going to have a whole pie. Once you separate, it'll be less than one whole pie, and you might not be able to afford to keep your home.
You don't know how much the house is going to sell for. How do you know how much you're going to need to buy them out?
Because you get a valuer. If you're not selling it, if you're not selling a house, then you get it valued. Because if you sell a house, the price, you don't need to get it valued, because the value of the house is what some buyer is prepared to pay for it. But if you're going to buy the house out, or the other person's going to buy the house out, then you get a valuer to value it. And that process usually involves one person giving 3 valuers' names to the other person, and then the other person chooses one, and then the valuer comes around, has a look at the property, and gives a report on what the value is worth. And before the valuer does that, you do the right steps to make it so it's a single expert for both of you. You're kind of saying, if I give you 3 names, you choose one, we agree, whatever they say, that's what we will agree on. So, and that's how you sort of get the argument down into a number, and then you work from there.
That's great for high conflict people to shut them up. Yes. Say, okay, here's 3. Yep. We're going to agree on this, and it doesn't matter what they come back with. That's what we're sticking to.
The court is really strong on not letting anyone else go and get a subsequent valuation and saying, "Oh, this is my value." No, we have a single expert.
If the house prices go up, then it doesn't matter.
If the house prices are going up and you're wanting to buy the house out, don't delay. Get cracking on it, because the amount changes. Similarly, if the house prices are going up and you've had a valuation and it's been 6 months of argy-bargy working out how you're going to sell it, and you haven't got to that point yet, there might need to be another valuation, an updated valuation. So, if there's an incentive there, once you've got your value, work out your split, because they'll have to get an updated valuation. Or if the house prices drop, then the person who is paying out would want to get the house revalued by that same valuer.
So if someone is getting letters from their ex saying, you must pay the mortgage, and you've left, you don't technically have to.
Technically you do, because you can't tell one of the banks that you've decided to only pay half the mortgage for the time being, or not the mortgage. But but if you can't afford it, and the other person can't afford it, then you may have to take it. And often the thing that triggers an urgent application to the court, in my experience, was a letter from the bank saying, we're going to sell the house from under you. And I'd attach that letter, and the court then will take some action, either to list it for sale yourselves if you can't afford it, or whatever.
Now, one question that crops up a lot with high conflict and manipulative controlling pain in the bums is, they know how much you love the house and they don't want you to have it. They want to punish you for leaving them. What's the court's opinion on that if you can afford to keep it?
The court has an obligation. The court has an obligation imposed on it by the Family Law Act to maintain the asset pool and not diminish the amount of assets you guys have got to share between you. So if you've got a house, you love it, and you can afford to buy it, and the other person says, over my dead body, you're not getting that house, the court will support you in taking over that house, because the amount of agents' fees that you would pay is a waste of the assets of the parties. But think about this. I just would like our listeners to think about this, because sometimes the default position is for people, how do I keep the house? How do I keep the house? And sometimes it becomes inevitable that you're not going to be able to keep the house. But to help people come to terms with that, I always used to say, go and do a few open homes. Go and look at just have a good old sticky beak at some of these open houses, and they can see there's a new way of living. They just need to be facing forward. And the number of times they come back and go, you know what? I don't want the upkeep of that old big house. I'm moving. And then it can break that deadlock.
And I think what you've just mentioned there is really important. Again, we're not financial advisors at all, but if you're being clever and you're following our steps and you've got a budget for the moment, you haven't got your property settlement yet, but you might have a budget and you know what you can and you can't afford. If staying in the house is going to be, have you factored in, fixing anything if it breaks, or getting the gutters cleaned before the storms hit, or what happens if the aircon breaks? Can you afford not only to keep paying the mortgage, but can you afford to keep it up? And you're right, Mum. I think there's a lot of people, it's a psychological thing, and we do talk about it, and I really, really want to keep the house. Yeah. And I think it's important to mention it here as well, that sometimes it's better to leave that past history behind and start a new chapter. And psychologically, it can be helpful. I do hear a lot of people wanting to stay for the kids, to say, I want to keep the stability for the children. Does that get considered at all in the courts?
Not in the property settlement from the court's point of view, except perhaps if each of you could afford the mortgage. What I think you need to think about with the house is, like, kids they'll go wherever. It's only teenagers who sort of hunker down, but they're okay if they want. They'll come with you if you move and you do it well, or whoever they're supposed to be living with. But while you're in that house where your ex used to live, particularly if your ex has any simmering resentment or maybe tendency towards anger or family violence, it can be a bit like a red rag to a bull, that you're in the house and, that she's worked so hard for, and there you sit in your house, or he sits in the house. And sometimes to get your boundaries back, to stop them coming on the property and looking in the house, and that, you might be better off in a different environment and somewhere that's never been their place. But if you do stay in the house and you're paying the mortgage, or the mortgage is getting paid, it doesn't give your ex-partner a right to come back in the house, because you're in a position of a tenant and it's your house, and it's an invasion, I think, of privacy for them to come there. And it's also a little bit of family violence or coercive control. If they're coming to a place where you've told them they're not welcome, then, that might be something to look at, maybe getting a family violence order against them.
Even just calling 1-800-RESPECT and getting some clarity, because it is, if you've been in that situation for so long, and if they are manipulative, controlling, they're probably very, very good at what they do. And just because you've separated doesn't mean they all of a sudden stop manipulating and controlling you. So that's going to continue. And the best way you can help yourself is talk to a professional, ring 1-800-RESPECT, get them to refer you to someone, and then they can reality check and go, you know what, your ex coming back to your house whenever they feel like it, and having a set of keys and all that sort of stuff. After you've separated and you've got your own separate living homes, it's probably not for the best. So look, we've gone a little bit sideways talking about mortgages, but Mum, and it is to me as clear as mud.
Oh no.
But the best thing that anyone can do, and you've done your best to explain it in a short 40-minute chat, Mum. But the best thing anyone can do is, one, go and see a lawyer. If you can't, go and see community legal services. We've got an episode on that. I'll put that in the link. And find out, what can you do? Have a look at your money situation. Have a look at the mortgage situation and figure out what suits you best for your new future. And make sure you're not going to be stuck in some giant mess. Because, Mum, after separation, things are counted differently, aren't they? After contribution?
Yeah, post-separation contributions are counted differently, but your payments on the mortgage are not counted as a different contribution. They're just...
What about paying utilities?
No, that's not either, unless you're paying them for someone else.
Okay. So really, really, a lot of people need to get it in their heads. The best thing you can do is sort this out as soon as possible because that money is just...
That's right.
Just going away.
Yeah. That's a very sad note. Look, I heard a professor whose name I won't mention at a course some time ago said that sometimes the biggest risk for families is at the time that the house sells. He said, because everybody knows it's not over until you sell the house. That was in his words. And that some people harbour a hope that there'll be a reunion between them both. Once the house is gone, it's really a very public declaration that this time of our life is gone. Yeah. But it has to happen sometime. You can't, it doesn't help you letting it drag out.
Does our course help people figure out how to do that in a consent order?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yes.
It does.
Just in case anybody knows, the course is open again for a couple more days. It's closing on the 30th of May. If you're listening to this later, I'm sorry, but we only open it at certain times of the year to let people come in. So if you are interested, you can sign up to do the course. You can go to the divorcecourse.com.au to find out more.
And still, though, in the course, we say go and see a lawyer. Put all your facts down and go and see a lawyer. Yes. Because every case is different. Yep.
If that's you today, if you've clicked on this mortgage one because you've got nightmares about mortgages, then this is your sign to get it sorted. And Mum, I can't thank you enough. We did quickly touch on avoidant. Can we quickly touch on avoidant?
Yes.
What problems do people have with avoidant and mortgages?
If you want to sell the house and an avoidant person is in the house, they are not going to tidy up or be cooperative in sales. If the valuer comes around, they may not let them in. They just sit there, and it's very hard to get anything done with them. If at all possible, try and be the one who stays in the house, even if it has to be sold, and move the avoidant out, because you can do all those blooming open homes and tidying up and dealing with the real estate agents. But yeah, avoidant is a special class.
And I think we need to do a whole nother episode on what the heck to do with all their crap in the shed, or what to do with all their crap in the sewing room, or, what do you do with all their stuff if they don't want it? So we will do another episode on that. All right. So if you are interested in learning more about our course, please go to thedivorcecourse.com.au. If you'd like to leave a review, we are going to be picking one next week to get a free call from Mum. And also, if you haven't heard about it, we've got a new program that's starting very soon called Court Support. So if you're interested in that, go and have a look at our website and sign up to our email list so that you can find out more when it launches. And Mum, have you got any last helpful, supportive words other than just have lots of chocolates and cups of tea, because that goes without saying. But what can you give? What can you give to the people listening today who are in this hell stressing out?
Yeah. So I just want you all to know that in my 35, 36, 37 years of family law work, I have never met a case that couldn't be solved by the family court when it comes to the house. So you will all get through it. And the court is moving things through a lot quicker these days. So if you take the first couple of steps today, you will probably, under the new guidelines, by the end of this year or very early next year, have the whole thing sorted. You might get it sorted before Christmas if you reach agreement. Wouldn't that be nice to go into the Christmas and the new year or the new financial year, knowing that what you've got is yours and working with it? Okay.
Yeah. That would be nice. Okay. Sending our love to you all. We know it's tough at the moment with this situation, so hang in there. Go and have a listen to those other episodes. I've put them in the show notes. If you can't find the show notes, you can go to our blog, thedivorcecourse.com.au/blog, look for the mortgage episode, and then go in there and you'll be able to click on the hyperlinks that'll take you to those other episodes. Thank you, Mum, again for your wisdom. Sorry, I don't understand much of it, but I'm glad that we are able to help everybody here today. I'm sure it's helped somebody. Okay.
Well, thanks. hopefully people have recognised in some of those scenarios where they sit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and I also want to congratulate you for winning silver in the People's Choice Awards for women changing the world, which was held in London last night. Congratulations, Mum.
Well, thank you, Laura. Thank you.
That was People's Choice Awards. So it was listeners like you who voted. We can't thank you enough.
Yeah.
I think Mum definitely deserved that. And I cannot wait to see what this trophy looks like. And I hope, Mum, you put it on the shelf behind your head.
I will.
So we can all see
Indeed. I will. Unless it's really pink, you can have it then. I'll put it behind you.
No, Mum, it's yours. It's yours. All right. Thank you, Mum, for your time, and good luck, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Bye, Laura. Bye, everyone.
Bye. If you found this podcast helpful, we'd love it if you could rate, review and subscribe. By doing so, you are spreading the word to help someone else just like you. Lynn would like to remind you that this podcast is general advice only, and you should always get legal advice in relation to your particular situation. And remember that the Australian laws may have changed since recording.